Okay, good morning. Hello, friends. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Julia Myers, and I'm coming to you live from the Brooker Creek Preserve Environmental Education Center. Our education center is run by both our local Pinellas County government and UF IFAS Extension. And that's just an extension of the University of Florida that tries to provide research-based education to the public, like we're doing this morning. We are very excited for our program today on swallow-tailed kites. We have Miss Barb Walker and her very special guest Tori with her, and she is from the Tampa Bay Raptor Rescue. Quickly before we get started, I just wanted to let everyone know that you can utilize the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen for any questions you have throughout the program today, and then we'll get all of our questions to Miss Barb at the very end of the program. And so try to use the Q&A for your questions as opposed to the chat box. And you can put those in at any time, and don't worry, we won't forget about them. We will get to them all. We are also live streaming on Facebook, so if you've got any questions on there as well, feel free to utilize the comment box. I want to give a big thank you to our friends group, the Friends of Brooker Creek Preserve. They've graciously sponsored our program this morning, and their efforts support everything we do here. So if you'd like to know more about the Friends, you can check them out at the friendsofbrookercreekpreserve.org. And let's get right to it. Thank you so much for joining us, Barb, and you can take it away.
Thank you so much, Julia. And thank you also to the Friends of Brooker Creek who have been so supportive of us throughout the years. So yes, I am Barb Walker, and I'm coming to you live from Moccasin Lake Nature Park, which is in Clearwater. It's just off of Drew Street in US 19, kind of tucked back in a neighborhood. And it's one of those hidden gems that few people really realize that we're here. While we do our presentation this morning on swallowtail kites, you may hear some commotion in the background. Just behind my computer, I have two lovely kestrels, and then on perches just on the other side of the room are three falcons, and they were just having a breakfast of chicken drumsticks. So and all of these birds are on display here at Moccasin Lake. And we had a little construction going on. One of the old buildings was removed, but the park's been completely renovated. And the city of Clearwater actually built us a raptor care center. And one by one, we've been improving all of the enclosures and adding birds. So we have, actually, we're up to 14 different species. And the reason that we wanted to go for breadth of species is because the point is that diversity is extremely important. And for the story of the kites, diversity is very, very critical. I have next to me Tori, and that name came from Roger Torrey Peterson. So we're trying to give our birds some environmental names. We have American kestrel behind me that actually is named Amelia Earhart, H-E-A-R-T. So, and we have Winston church owl, who is also a favorite. Swallowtail kites, in particular, this bird came from near the preserve. There's a neighborhood called Woodfield, and a couple there whom I happen to know found the bird, and they called rescue, and a rescuer went out to pick up the bird, and it was on the ground and it had a damage on the wing. It had maggots in the feather follicles, and the bird also has a deformed beak, so it is no longer able to go into the wild. I suspect that little Tory here is a male because of the weight in the 450 gram range, between 450 and 500, and the females are usually a little weightier. How do these birds in the wild spend their life? Well, they spend it on the wing. It used to be that kites were in 21 different states, and now they're down to 7. Why would this be? Well, for one, birds do get shot sometimes, and that is a shame. Back many years ago, when they wanted to study swallowtail kites, they actually shot the bird, and that's how they got their hands on species to study it. And there was a account of the shooting of a swallowtail kite by an author named Arthur Bent. If you haven't read anything by Arthur Bent, that's very interesting to read these older accounts of interactions between people and birds. There's some other things, the habitat fragmentation, migration, and nests that are on lands that are to be developed. Really good example would be north of the Pinellas County line. They're near Starkey Park and throughout the area, lots of nesting swallowtail kites, but those lands are owned by development companies that are building a variety type of housing for people. So when these birds actually come back to nest, they could find that the area that they utilized in the past, along with the resources that utilized provided, are gone. So there's a lot of issues, and because of these issues, this bird is one to watch as critical conservation need. There's about 2,500 breeding pairs, and it was extricated from 12 states, which is really a lot. So they used to have a really big range, and now their range is really been shrunken. And Florida carries the population of swallowtail kites. They began arriving. It can even be late February. You know, the slide says March, but you can see them in late February. And it used to be, and this year's been different, but that they would arrive almost always on the 3rd or the 4th. I observed 3 different nests for about a 10-year time period around my home, also near the Booker Creek Preserve. And they were so true to their dates, it was amazing. But there was a new development put in, and then the owls also get pressure at night from owls, and if the owls find they might move around a little bit. So you know, they don't have a high site fidelity, for example, as the ospreys or the bald eagles, but they do come back to Florida every March and begin mating. And it does not take very long. They build a very loose nest, and the start of incubation date that I reported most was right in the first week of April. So we hope that some of these birds will be going down on nests soon. This is the range that they used to be in, and you can see what it is now. Pesticides play a part in this as well. The bird sitting next to me, who is asleep, I don't know if you can see that. This bird has got his eyes closed and decided that PowerPoints and talking heads aren't his thing. Okay, he woke up. You know, these guys in Florida, they come back and they are carrying the population, and they spend their entire life flying on the wing, other than the time that they come back and they incubate. The female, when she gets down really into the nest, and she will use her feet, they stomp their feet, and they pound and pound and pound the material on the inside of the nest down, and then they go down on incubation right about now. So we hope that they're successful. Throughout the last decade, there's been interesting sightings of kites there's one that made it all the way to Manitoba, Canada. These birds can easily do 80 miles in a day just for foraging only. So they have the ability to not have to work as hard with their wings. As far as wing beating goes, they use their tail as a rudder, and they float on thermals. That's actually how they make their migration too. All right. They weigh 370 to 600 grams. As I told you, this bird is somewhere in the middle. The only way I can really tell but the sex would be to take a blood draw or get some feathers and have a DNA analysis performed. So we can only guess at this point that it's in the lower half of that range, but so many are in the middle that it's hard to tell. They have nice long wings, 22 to 25 inches long, and they're migratory. They're the largest North American kite, and there are some other kites. We have Mississippi kites, and of course, in South Florida, there are snail kites. But the swallowtail has an ability in the air to perform a ballet that you cannot believe your eyes when you see it. It makes your heart just jump out of your chest when you see their acrobatics. It's also very exciting to see the flight of groups of kites together when they're kind of flying up in a circle together on a thermal. It's called a kettle. They have an incredibly diverse diet, and they eat a lot of insects, so they have the spongiest stomachs among all the raptors because they can actually eat wasps. They when they get done here in Florida, they get done with their nest, they do a lot of foraging to fatten up, sometimes in large groups, and they gather together in very large groups of hundreds in critical areas prior to leaving for migration and launching off the Florida Straits across the Gulf of Mexico in late summer. And late summer, you know what happens in late summer. We have hurricanes, and the winds can change, and they have 4 days, about 4 days to make it across the Gulf of Mexico by rising up on the thermal and down and over. So they kind of float towards the Yucatan Peninsula. And when they get there, they go deep down through Central America into South America. And when they get there, they are with kites that live in South America. They're genetically different, but they're all sharing resources. Sometimes you hear swallowtail kites before you see them. They have a very high-pitched chirp. It reminds me of a squeaky rubber ducky. And sometimes you will hear that only to realize that it is a mockingbird friend. So where can you find them? Well, they like lowland forest and wetlands, and they love oak hammocks, and they forage over orange groves, and they roost in areas like Fish Eating Creek and Lake Okeechobee, and you can find them over cattle ranches because that's kind of some open land. That could be in an area where you might see bluebirds or American kestrels as well, to take advantage of that type of a habitat. Also in the swallowtail kite habitat, often I've seen red-shouldered hawk and hummingbird. So some really fantastic spring avian gems that are all together in those types of areas. Now, some of their acrobatics are just awesome. They actually will bend the long pointed wing and begin a dive. And as they dive, they do something called a feather rouse, which birds can control their feathers, and they can kind of loosen them up and shake. And they do that as they're in a dive, which is really an amazing thing to watch. I've also seen them almost really hover, where they've come up to one position and then they turn as they're hovering to change directions. They'll dip down, they have an undulating type of flight, and then sometimes they'll twist up. They're amazing. An X-ray is when they're coming at you and all you see is the face, and you see the split tail and the edge of the wings. And so they do some really, really cool acrobatics. They're really fun to watch. Definitely the most acrobatic bird in the world, and maybe the prettiest bird in the world too. They sure are gorgeous. Here's a couple of examples. There he's just flying. You can see that for that split tail, that long split tail. Sometimes people call them scissor tail hawks, and sometimes they're mistaken for magnificent frigate birds, but it's actually a swallowtail kite. And what are they eating as they are flying on the wing? They're eating insects, dragonflies, wasps, reptiles, lizards, snakes, frogs, bats, small birds. I think that I have seen them definitely take the little tiny turkeys when they're very tiny and they just hatch. And there would be one day the turkeys would be parading across the field with 11 turkeys, little babies. And the next day there were 10. The next day they were 9. It went all the way down to 2. And I suspect the kites of that. There are birds that are predators to swallowtail kites too. A peregrine falcon could definitely take down a kite. And so could a great horned owl. And owls certainly can run a lot of problems for these birds at night, causing them to move. I don't know if you can see that the top bird has a frog. And I've noticed that when we have different levels of rain, that the hydrology affects how many frogs we get. And I feel like their productivity has been better during years that we had plenty of frogs on the ground for them to eat. And when they have little kites, baby kites in their nests, they rob a lot of baby bird nests and feed the baby bird to the kids for the protein content and for the very rich nutrients that they would get from the baby bird yolk. Now, here's a pair of mature birds passing food. This bird's eating on the wing, just flying and eating. It's a dragonfly in this one. Right here in the upper right-hand top of the screen, if you look carefully, you'll see that's a bat wing. So they're also catching bats and birds, as I mentioned. And they love lizards, and they share lizards often with their mate. The male will often bring a lizard to a female that's perched early in the morning, grooming herself, preening, saying, "Don't I look pretty?" And that is an invitation for the male to bring a gift. And once that occurs, mating can occur. They do drink. Kind of amazing. I've never personally seen this, but I love seeing the pictures. We have a Facebook page, Swallowtail Kites in Florida, and a lot of people will post their photos of the kites drinking, and I think it's just absolutely gorgeous. They just skim the top of the water, just like that. This is definitely how you can find a nest, is if you see a bird carrying nesting materials. They like to get up to the top, near the top of tall trees. It's usually a little lower in the top of the tree, and it's in the second or third layer. So it's down just enough that you have to look through the trees to usually find the nest. But if you see a bird actually carrying material, then you know to pay attention to which direction it's going in. These nests are extremely hard to spot. But what we do know about swallowtail kites is where there's one kite nest, there's probably others, because in close proximity, because they nest in little neighborhoods. And it's been interesting over the years to watch the kites that nest near and around the preserve. And one thing that I've noticed is when they return, a bird will stop and check all the various places that they've nested to see if their friends are back. So I love to watch that. And they definitely, oh my goodness, they definitely show defensive behavior near their nest site. So they will escort out other birds that are too close, including eagles, ospreys, hawks, vultures, crows, you name it, and they will defend their territory. Sometimes they carry moss. That was a YouTube. I could go back to it after this, but I'm not sure how that would behave in the Zoom program. So maybe we can do that last. We can see. So once the lizard has been delivered to this pretty girl, the male will feed her. You will see a lot of synchronized flying, and you will hear vocalizations. That is, and a lot of diving, and that's an indication that you definitely have a pair. So when you have that type of behavior, you probably know you're pretty near a nest. They lay 2 to 3 eggs, and they will switch duties. One will sit on them, and the other one will go out and hunt, and they will share those duties for 28 to 30 days. And then when you have chicks in the nest, it's only 38 to 41 days until they fledge. They get out of those nests very quickly. Here's one of those females preening with the lizard delivery. That's mating, and it's graceful mating in the photograph, but usually it does look like there's just a bunch of ruffled feathers at the top of some skinny little tree, and can't even imagine how they balance. But again, they are fairly graceful birds. And then one dives off, and oftentimes that's repeated throughout the morning. Here's an example of a kite nest. You can barely even see it on the slide because it's so disguised. She's sitting right on it. Here it's disguised by pine needles and moss. One of the things that when I was out in the field with the scope, if I wanted to look for a swallowtail kite nest, when you scan through the trees, you could look for this white dot and something that kind of doesn't belong. And that was another way to be able to spot a nest, is to be able to look for the white coloring of the swallowtail. Their favorite trees are called loblolly pines, but those aren't available everywhere. So we often see them also in cypress. Here's an incubating bird. And here's one with some youngins in the nest. And they are absolutely adorable. They might be one of the cutest raptor babies anywhere. They have very sweet faces. And look at this bird just flying in, most likely with the delivery that we can't see. That tree almost looks like an oak tree. I'm not sure about the leaves. Maybe someone online knows what kind of tree that bird is in. Isn't he adorable? You can tell when they start to grow up in the picture. If you look at the young bird closest to the front at the wing, you'll see the black feathers are just starting to sprout out. And he's got a sibling. They lay 2 to 3 eggs. They hatch 2 to 3 birds, often fledging 1 to 2 birds. Inside of the nest, there's a great deal of sibling rivalry. And if the food is low, like not enough water for frogs to complete the diet, then one sibling may get primary consideration to make sure that they get a bird out that year. When they get to be a little bit older in the nest, instead of having, like Tori next to me is now a mature bird, but you can see Tori's chest is completely white right here. The birds in the picture, not so much. They have been hatched, they've grown a few weeks, and they get this rusty rufous color. And so that's stays with them. And that's one way you can tell when you're looking at a young bird after they fledged. If they still have a lot of rusty color on them, you know that's probably a hatched year bird that you're looking at. And their tail isn't as long. Here's another one tucked in the trees. And this one is a feeding. And you can see there's a green, looks like one of those green lizards to me. And I noticed that when the green lizards come out, that's when I see the swallowtail kites and the hummingbirds. But normally, as I said, it's the first week of March. I've had it as late as March 27th, and it's very possible that I have missed the return, for example, of my hummingbird this year, but so far, no show. So we're hoping that we do see them soon. Here's a couple of youngsters, and there's three of them actually in the photo. I found those three all sitting in one tree, and I knew all three didn't come out of one nest. It was in two nests, and all the siblings decided to meet up. So this is their meetup spot. You can see a little buffy color under this bird's wing, and you can see how shallow that tail is. That's what's telling you it's a youngster when you see them in flight. And they practice landing. Sometimes that's not so great for the other bird. Sorry, Mom. So there's an 87% chance of mortality associated with migration. So their first year survival rate is very low, and it hampers the growth rate of the overall population. One of the things that is benefiting the kites are the pre-migration communal roosts. I don't know if you all knew, but a couple of years ago, there were many of us involved in trying to secure critical wildlife areas. And those type of areas would be very important to swallowtail kites. And seeing this many kites in a tree at one time must be just a fantastic thing. I have never seen that many in a tree at one time, but it is common when they are getting ready to migrate. And typically the adults will leave first. This is a swallowtail that came out of a nest that was behind my home. And what happened was it was a very nice nest, but half of it collapsed. There were two babies in there, and what came down was half the nest and one baby, and then the other baby was still up there. Now they were very close to flying. So it was getting to be late in the season. And the kites have such a distinct rhythm and such a distinct pattern. They would show up the first week of March, and they would begin that nesting, and then by April they were on their eggs. I saw young pairs that were practice nesting even in late April, but you know, this guy, he wasn't quite ready to fly, but really close. And what they do is once their kids are flying, they'll teach them their natal territory. They teach them how to hunt, and you'd see them be so punctual at 7 a.m., at 10 a.m., at 1 a.m., at 4 a.m. And as these kites are getting ready to leave, you'd see them at not 7 a.m., 10 a.m., maybe 4 p.m., and those sightings would get, you know, less and less. So you want to make sure if you have a kid like this that's able to get back with his parents that you can. And this bird in question only had a sore foot. You can see he's favoring it. So we took him to the Audubon Center for Birds of Prey, and I continued to monitor the kites, and they had come out of the nest. So we thought the best thing for the bird was definitely to get back with his family to learn the natal territory prior to the migration. So it was very near the 4th of July, and For me, in those years, it was rare to see a kite after the 4th of July. There'd be a few sightings, but for the most part, they'd gone to their communal roost already. So I called the center and talked to Diana Flint, who is their rehabilitator. And she decided that the bird should come back. So we got the bird back and we went out at 7 o'clock in the morning to find the group of kites. No kites. So we waited until 10, and it was very, very good that they showed up, because they actually, we tossed the bird and it was reunited with its parents. It landed on a pine tree, and the adult immediately went over and they went beak to beak, just as if they were kissing. And they then all of a sudden, they stayed all day on the natal territory for 2 weeks until that bird was ready to go. This swallowtail kite got hung up in fishing line on a farm in Odessa, Florida. And, you know, he's very lucky because the farmer had a lift and got up there and cut the bird down and called. And by the time we picked it up, we drove it, actually, because the sanctuary is closed to the home of Barb Sudo, another fabulous rehabber of Florida. And she managed to, this bird was so weak, but managed to get this bird rehabbed, and we went out and released this bird together. And within seconds of the release, other kites showed up. So it immediately reunited with its family. Here's a picture of it, the swallowtail kites pedaling. Now, the Avian Research and Conservation Institute does migration tracking. And I like to encourage everybody to go out and visit their website and check out their migration tracking. If possible, make donations. With tracking, you're able to protect areas that are critical to swallowtail kites, or at least try. These migration trackers are called backpacks, and they're getting smaller and smaller. 2 years ago, 3 years ago already, it would have been 2018, the year of the bird, which seems like yesterday to me. But on February the 14th, there was a conference, and one of the tracking organizations, Max Planck Institute, spoke, and they had sent up a very special antenna on February the 14th of 2018 on the Russian rocket ship. And that went to the International Space Station, and it was to pick up the signals of where birds and animals that are tracked, what they're doing. The goal was stated to be able to predict large disasters 2 weeks ahead of time, or 10 days ahead of time, by watching animal and bird movement. So there's some really interesting things going there, but this stuff is expensive. And then the tracking, actual tracking communication is expensive too. So if there's anything you can do for the Avian Research and Conservation Institute, it's always appreciated, as well as it's always appreciated if you donate here to help us continue to teach about swallowtail kites. Here's the results of the migration tracking. And what you'll see, it's a pretty steady line, as I described, down through Florida and across the Florida Straits into the Yucatan Peninsula, through Central America, and deep down into Brazil. So they really are going a very, very long way. There were some really bad fires in South America, and a lot of people were worried about the swallowtail kites, the Florida or the United States swallowtail kites that were migrating there at the time. But it's hopefully has not negatively affect them. It was shown that red kites actually and other kites benefit from fire, in that it scared the prey out and they were able to catch things out on the outskirts pretty easily. So, you know, but they do need to have proper resources when they get down into these territories, because when they're there, the other swallowtail kites of South America are nesting, which is amazing. You'll notice a few of these birds have come up through Mexico and up around the Gulf, right along the Gulf Coast, and then down into Florida. The Tampa bird, actually, that was tagged, a Popka, I believe his name is, actually did that. And he flew completely north around the Gulf of Mexico and then came down to Tampa. Now that's a smart bird because he's learned a very valuable lesson, a lesson that kites need to know, falcons need to know, ospreys need to know. Stay overland as long as possible. The Avian Research Institute is at, I've got their, right now, the slide that has their link up. It's arcinst.org/report sightings. So when you see them, you can actually go onto their site and report sightings. Knowing where groups of kites are nesting could be extremely helpful if there's something that's going into the development process and you can get involved early enough. You know, you might not be able to stop development, but you might be able to save some space or save some nests. So it's good to know where they are. I'd like to thank the Avian Research and Conservation Institute for the many slides that they shared with me for this presentation, and the Audubon Center for Birds of Prey and the City of Clearwater, and the photographers, Carrie Bowers, Jim Gray, Andy Nugent, Will Randall, Maria Valentine. They all gave photos to help illustrate the lives of the swallowtail kites. I thank you for your interest, and I am open to any questions that you might have.
Okay, that was wonderful. Thank you, Barb. Such wonderful pictures. If you're able to stop sharing your screen now, and then we can maybe get a better view of you and Tori there. I think that might, yep, wonderful. Thank you. Awesome. Okay, so we do have a couple questions, and if anyone else has any, now is the time to put them in the Q&A box. One question we did have is, and I think you may have touched on this when they're mating, but what is the noise they make sometimes when they're diving? Is that a particular call when they're starting to pair up?
I think that it's that high squeaky sound that I hear like a rubber ducky. And it's a fairly delicate sound, but it's unmistakable when you hear it. If you go out to, there's some sites where you can actually listen to the audio of a variety of birds. I do it all the time. And sometimes I'll actually listen to it in the backyard and see if any other swallowtail kites will come in. I don't do it often, but I do play it once in a while. And I would say the other kite's more vocal than this bird. This bird is imprinted and thinks it's a human being. So it's a very high-pitched, squeaky sound. Like the bird's excited. It's kind of hormonal.
It's a very sweet call too. I did just put some of the calls in the chat that the Cornell Lab puts on their website.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. So the next question is an ID question. They were watching a large group flying over Honeymoon Island, and they looked like kites, and they had forked tails with white heads, and the fork and the tails were not spread as wide, but they were definitely forked. Could that be anything besides a swallowtail kite?
Yes. And the key word for me was we were looking at it, we were by some islands. You may have been looking at magnificent frigate birds who also have a forked tail. So go out and look up at the magnificent frigate bird and then look at the kite, and then you should know which one you saw. Because it is possible to see large groups of kites over an island too. Several years ago, there were 72 kites in the air over Fort DeSoto migrating.
Wow.
Yeah.
Very cool. And we've got one more question here. They were asking if you could discuss a little more about their diet. You did go into a bit of detail with that about halfway through the presentation, but it's mostly reptiles and like lizards.
It is. you know, it's anything you can eat. They eat tons of bugs. So, you know, native plants are important, and they'll gather in groups of hundreds in Dunellen over the melon fields, catching all the bugs. And there was a lot of different types of bugs. And so you're talking about, you need bugs, frogs, snakes, lizards, bats, baby birds, small rodents. It's very diverse because, and they have to have a diverse diet because they go, because of their long trip and their long migration, they go over a lot of different types of habitat. So when I started the program, not just in the middle, but in the beginning, I said, you know, we have a breadth of species here because birds need diversity. And that's the whole point. And so you have to protect a lot to get diversity. And kites, to me, they just speak conservation because of all of the different things that they eat. There has been even accounts of them eating fruits.
Interesting.
Yeah, in South America.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Very cool.
It was a specific type of fruit. I'd have, you know, memory. I'd have to look that one up, but it was a very interesting report.
Thank you. And then someone did ask, is your Raptor Center at Moccasin Lake open for tours right now? Or are they just open to the public for?
We are open to the public free of charge Tuesday through Sunday from 10 to 5. And every other Saturday, we do science Saturdays for the various ages of children that visit the park. 0 to 99, that's okay. And we on Sunday, they're doing an egg drop and some fun lessons about eggs. So the best way to keep track of our events is to visit our website, and I'll tell you what it is. It's Moccasin Lake Raptor Sanctuary.org. That's how you can best find information about the birds and what the group of volunteers has planned for events.
Perfect. Thank you. I did just find that and stuck it in the chat for anyone that would like to quick save it to their desktop. Yep, wonderful. Well, that is all the questions we have. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you so much for Tori joining us as well. I see she's
Tori's preening,
getting cleaned up.
Should we give him a little bath too?
Yes.
Can you see him okay?
We see him perfectly.
He loves water.
Oh.
Like, oh, thank you. This is the Flarisol. It comes from Bed Bath & Beyond. They're around $7. So, and I use them for birds because I can find a use for almost anything for a bird. And we thank you so much for having us. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us. It's always a pleasure, and we look forward to having you back in the future. And I encourage everyone to check out all of their wonderful resident birds over at the Moccasin Lake Nature Park. So thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful Easter and rest of your weekends. Thanks.
Yep.
Bye.
Bye-bye.